All right, we are studying the subject of the church, and we kind of did a little bit of a shotgun approach in the last class, just to kind of survey some various ideas. I want to return to this issue of the difference between the local and the universal church. And so I'm going to put this up here. And we have local and we have universal. And the word church is really translating a word that just means group. And so, we read the Bible and we read the word group, we're talking about a group of what? A group of people. But there's, how many different groups does the Bible talk about? Well, we might think of Acts 19 and the group that was rioting at Ephesus. But predominantly, the Bible is really talking about two groups of people, and it's local groups of professing Christians and a universal group consisting of all believers. And really, the biggest thing these two groups have in common is the fact that they both have the same word used to describe them, which is ecclesia. And apart from that, we start seeing that there's a lot of differences between them, and we need to recognize this distinction. Now, I gave a lesson on this a month or two ago or whatnot, but I think it's important to review this idea. I think a lot of brethren pay lip service to the distinction between the local and the universal church, but when it comes time to put it into practice in our thinking or in the way we talk about the church, sometimes we'll be inconsistent. And, maybe you're not, maybe you're perfect about this, and so this lesson won't tell you anything new, but maybe it will. Then again, maybe it'll give you something helpful to think about. I had to wrestle with this for a while. But we should not be confusing these two things together. The universal church is not this big box with a bunch of local churches inside of it. That's not what that is. They are not. One is not simply a subset of the other. They are distinct. One is a model of the other, and you can learn things about one by looking at the other. But they're not. It's not like God's got His universal group, and it's made up of a bunch of different little local groups, and then those little local groups are made up of a bunch of people. So I'm going to ask some very basic questions, and we'll just see how we answer them. First question I'll ask is number. How many churches are there? One. Well, anybody want to argue with that? It's more fun when you argue. Come on. One. Is there only one local church?
Nope.
Oh, no, there's not. So there's one universal church. Okay, so we got to make the distinction right here. What about local churches? How many of those are there?
Any number.
Countless. Yeah, any number. I like countless. I'm going to put that up here. Yeah, okay. Now, right away, have you ever heard people use the expression, the one true church? You can only apply it to the item on the right. You cannot apply it to the item on the left. You cannot refer to your local church as the one true church. You can only speak about the universal church in those terms. And there's passages in the Bible we could go to. How many churches did Jesus say He was going to build? One, Matthew 16:18. On this rock I will build my church. And, which church is He talking about? Is He talking about some specific local group? No. He's talking about the universal group of all saved Christians. When Paul says that there is one body, which one of those two is he talking about? Universal group. Anytime we see a passage that's talking about the church, we need to ask ourselves, which one is it talking about? Is it talking about the one on the right, or is it talking about the one on the left? Right. So that was an easy question to answer, wasn't it? All right, let's try founder. Who founded the church? The builder and founder is Christ. Okay. That applies to the universal church, doesn't it? Okay. What about the local church? Did Jesus found the local church? Don.
In a sense, he did.
Yes, you're right. In a sense, he did. But did he found it in the same way that he founded the universal one? No. Okay.
He's founded one local congregation.
Okay, yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. Is it wrong to say that men found local congregations? No. Don looks resistant to that idea. Okay, Don?
A group of us got together in Sefner years ago, and we decided there was no local congregation in Sefner, and one was started.
Okay.
We started it, so that was founded by men. But was it founded by men upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets and Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone? It should be, but not always.
Okay. Don, you had something, I could tell. Well, what does 1 Corinthians 3 say? In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, in verses 10 and 11, Paul's talking about, how the local church at Corinth got started. Somebody read that for me. 1 Corinthians 3, verses 10 and 11.
According to the grace of God, which is given me, the wise master builder, and laid the foundation, and another built it thereupon. Other foundation can no man lay.
Okay, now there's two things we learn from this passage. Number one, no local church is without Christ. You're not building a church without, you don't start a local congregation if Christ is not involved. He is the foundation. The second thing we learn is, yes, it is appropriate to speak about men building a congregation. Because Paul says, I built this, I laid the foundation, and others are building on it. Don.
I realized a little earlier, so I defined
Okay, yeah, there's another example of that kind of language. Same chapter, actually. Uh-huh.
It has to be founded on the principles of the Bible, and it has to be.
All right. So as far as the Bible is concerned, a local church is founded by men on the foundation of Jesus Christ. I'm going to say men on Christ. All right. Now, are we good so far? No comments, no questions, anything like that? Okay. All right. We might also ask, when was the church founded? The Bible doesn't really put a lot of emphasis on the date the way I've seen some of our brethren do. When was the church founded? Which church was founded on Pentecost?
Well, actually, it was the Universal Church and the church at Jerusalem.
So there were two congregations formed on Pentecost. One of them was this universal group over here, AD 33, Pentecost. And the other was a local group that got started at Jerusalem. What about this group here at 14th Avenue? When did this church start? Anybody know? Grethel knows. She was there, actually. She's one of the original members at this local group. When was this group founded? All right. Were they even meeting at this location back then? Yeah. Now here's that was the same group of people, wasn't it? It was the same local group which moved from a couple different locations, and I guess they, just designated themselves by whatever location they were at, because now we're here at the 14th Avenue Church of Christ. There's a group belongs to Jesus Christ, founded on Jesus Christ, of people who are Christians who are, trying to edify each other, and we meet at 14th Avenue. Now this location, I think, somebody told me 1970 is when they started here, but, prior to that they existed, was this group founded in AD 33? No. Okay, The Universal Group was founded in AD 33, though. So when we say that the one true church was founded on Pentecost in AD 33, we're not talking about the local group you attend. We're talking about this big, invisible group of people, all of God's saved people, that has always that will always exist. There's a sense in which the universal church has always existed, if you incorporate, the idea of the Old Testament saints and all that. It kind of flows forwards and backwards the way the blood of Christ flows forwards and backwards. But there is also, just like Christ has a specific moment in history where He offers His sacrifice, there's a specific moment in history where, the Spirit is poured out and this group is founded, if you will. So it's kind of a, both temporal and atemporal thing. Does that sound confusing at all? It's kind of paradox, but it is kind of cool to think about. Mark?
I think you've just illustrated really a point that, in fact, the date of the founding or the time of the founding of the church is really what one preacher I know used to call that an LP argument. LP either stands for low profile, or it could stand for lousy point, or it could stand for last point, but that's an LP argument. The time of the founding is not important as much as it is who was the founder, what is it founded on.
Note that point wasn't even good enough to get onto the board. But yeah, you're right. I think it's a corollary to the second question of the founder.
Because you can argue the church did exist because we read about the church in the wilderness, talking about the Israelites. Mm-hmm. And they are often called a church, same word, I'm sure, in the Septuagint, that's translated church in the New Testament, throughout the Old Testament. They're called an assembly, mm-hmm. or a church. So it's the people of God.
Yes. Now, occasionally I'll visit a local congregation and they'll have a big stone engravement or sign out front that says established AD 33. Well, what are you talking about? You're not talking about your local group because that wasn't started in AD 33. And so there is kind of a little hybridization that goes into putting up a sign like that, I think. Grethel. I'm using the words interchangeably right now. Is there a distinction? What is it?
I might argue that founding has the idea of a foundation to it, whereas starting just has the idea of just beginning something that doesn't refer to a foundation at all. And there's really a sense in which that's true and a sense in which it's not.
Yeah, I don't want to dispute too heavily on the nuance between those. I agree with Mark. There's a foundation idea there, but is the universal group, is that built on a foundation? Well, yeah. Is the local group built on a foundation? So there's a sense in which we can say that, yes, both are founded. Now, they're even both founded on the same thing, which is Jesus Christ. The difference is, of course, who does the constructing. Christ is building, constructing, or He has constructed, or will construct, however you want to say it, this great building on this foundation, and that is the universal group. And the stones that are incorporated into this building are people, Christians, like you and me. Peter talks about living stones in 1 Peter chapter 2. Now, Paul talks about himself being a builder, and he talks about Apollos being a builder, and he talks about all these other. And this is an analogy. You don't want to press it too hard because we talk about founding. It does invoke the image of a building, but that's an image that's used to describe what is going on. Now, in a local congregation, there's a building process going on, and we, as people, are in the process of building that, aren't we? Let me ask you something. Is this local congregation, are we done building here?
Hope not.
No, not at all. We still have a building work to do, and we have to build each other up individually as well. That's what the word edification comes from the same English word family as edifice. This idea of a building. That's what edification is. It's building one another up. I want to move past this. Who is a member of the church? Go. Okay. Okay, I actually had two questions on here, membership and entrance, and you answered the second one, but they really kind of go together.
Acts 2:42.
Yeah, the Lord adds. Okay. Wait a second. The Lord adds to the church. Some versions don't have church in there, but I do think it's talking about the church. Which church? The Lord adds you to which church? Huh?
The Lord adds daily those.
Okay, so the members are saved people and they're added by the Lord. Acts 2:42. And which side of the chart does that go on? You sure?
Over there.
Huh? All right, I'm going to put it up here for now. Saved people. And the Lord adds. Okay, all right. But I'm not ready to put it down on the local side yet because I want to explore that a little more. Done. Acts 2:47. People kept saying 2:42. Acts 2:47. Yes.
I agree with that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I even have it written down here. I don't know why I didn't look. Is everybody in the local church saved? No, not necessarily. They can be, but not necessarily. Okay, why? We don't know the hearts of other people, but the Lord does. And 2 Timothy 2:19 talks about that, how the Lord knows those who are His. So are there sometimes people in local churches that are not saved? Yes, there are. Are there sometimes people outside of local churches that are saved? Seeing some heads nodding, some heads shaking. Huh? No.
3 John. Go to 3 John.
Okay.
Wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, or who loveth to have the preeminence, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does unjustly, accusing us with wicked words, and not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either, and he forbids those who desire to do so, and puts them out of the church. Now here are saved individuals that Diotrephes puts out of the church. But just because you've been put out of the local congregation does not mean you've been put out of Christ's universal church and are not saved.
Yes, Mark, yes.
I would challenge Diotrephes' authority to do that.
Well, I agree with you. Diotrephes is wrong to do that.
And John
But-
challenges his authority here, yes.
But
But it's happening.
so these people have been kicked out of the Diotrephes church of whatever, and they're no longer part of that local church. Are they still part of the universal church?
Absolutely.
Yes, they are. Are they still saved? Yes, they are.
John's-
Even though they may not presently be a member of a local church. Now here's...
Yeah, John even says Diotrephes kicks him out.
Anybody? Peggy, you have something.
Well, I was going to talk about little
Okay.
children. Will they become Christians regardless?
I've wondered about how we incorporate children in this big chart I'm writing, but I don't have an answer yet. So I'm gonna.
Well, Christ said we should become His little children.
I do think yes, the kingdom belongs to children. I mean, that to me seems pretty certain from what Jesus has to say. I got one other example I want to throw out here in Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9. Let me ask you something. Okay, you say the Lord adds you to the universal church. Does the Lord add people to the local group at 14th Avenue? Does that mean that every person who obeys the gospel of Jesus Christ is now a member at 14th Avenue? Okay, so does the Lord add people to 14th Avenue? Done. we sure about that? Well, hold on one second. First of all, we've already conceded that not everybody in a local group is saved. So we're going to say that they are professing Christian. I don't want to write out the word Christian because there's not enough room. Okay, professing Christians versus people who are actually Christians, we might say. Now, does the Lord add pretenders to a group? I'm just wondering here. Well, how can they be a member of a local church then? Because men accept them, right. How do you become a member of a local group of Christians? Two different things here.
Well, no, I wasn't talking about people who they and about
Well, I mean, is there...
how would it not be so?
Okay, let's turn to Acts chapter 9.
That's where I was going. Well, that's what I was telling you to turn.
Okay.
No, but go ahead. Go ahead. It's more effective if someone in the class says it.
Okay. Well, Paul, after he was baptized, was let down by a basket through the wall and come to Jerusalem and essayed to join himself to the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared unto them how he had seen the Lord, and so on and so forth. Well, you know that passage of Scripture. We've all read that many times. Paul was in the universal church. He essayed to join himself to the local group. The local group would not accept him because they didn't understand everything that, I'm not saying these people were dishonest, because I don't believe they were. They didn't know the story. When Barnabas explained the story of how Paul was actually converted to Christ, then they allowed him to join their number.
Okay.
But here was a case of a man who was saved, who was in the universal church, who was prohibited from joining the local group because they were afraid of him.
The question was posed because
Jesus adds them to the universal church. Now, when someone's baptized here...
the local church.
No, you're added to a local church when members of a local church accept you.
Maybe, whether it's 14th Avenue or somewhere or whatever.
No. Whenever you are baptized at a local congregation like this one, you are added to the universal church by God. Now, the members who were there when you were baptized will also accept you, and you become part of a local group as well. How do you become part of a local group? Men accept you, right? Kathleen.
Men accept you. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Kathleen had something.
Years ago.
Oh.
Same thing. Every year. Years ago.
Letters of recommendation. Well, I've heard of a...
For the fact that they have worked 20 years. They have been
You know where else you've heard of that? In the New Testament.
Barnabas
That's where.
for Saul.
Well, yeah, it wasn't a letter. It was just a personal recommendation there. But, the letter of 3 John, in addition to condemning Diotrephes, John also writes a letter of recommendation for somebody in the book of 3 John. He says in verse 12 that Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. And we add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. So there he is, recommending Demetrius to them and saying, that you're supposed to accept him. Yeah.
Yep.
Philemon and Onesimus, there's a sense in which that's a letter of recommendation. Now, Paul kind of chides the Corinthians because he says, you don't need a letter of recommendation from me because what? Because you are my letter of recommendation. You are living epistles in that instance. In 2 Corinthians 2 or 3, it says that. Yeah. Mark.
There is a very real sense, though, in which when one essays to join himself to the local church, and the local church, acting upon proper information, decides to accept that person in accordance with God's will, there is a very real sense in which God also puts him in the local church. Okay? Because those members are acting in accordance with his will. So yes, there is a sense in which that happens, but
there is a sense, but there's also a sense in which, like I said before, Christ founds a local church, but it's not the same way as what we're talking about with the universal church. And we do need to make that distinction. Lindy. I'm bamboozling you?
Well, kind of.
Okay.
No, not that, but I'm kind of torn because I can see this in multiple ways. Obviously, yes, I see the overlying big picture that, yes, the Lord has the control. The Lord is the one that is leading.
Yes.
But in that same sense, I see where God is saying, I believe that the Lord leads us, if we're willing to follow, that the Lord leads us to the local church that we're both best fit.
Well,
I can see where the Lord, in that sense, I feel like the Lord has added me to this local congregation.
Well, there's all sorts of things to be said for providence and for, God, leading us in certain directions in life. I probably wouldn't be here were it not for the grace of God and the providence of God and all that. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be a member at this local church either if I hadn't decided to come here, one, and two, the members hadn't decided to trust me.
Exactly, and that's the other side of the point that I see, because I can't be a member of a local church if I'm not accepted by the members.
So it's like the whole argument about Christ. Is he fully God or fully man? Was the process God or is it man? Well, there's a sense in which both are involved. I saw Don's and Keith's hand, and I don't know what order your hands popped up because they keep going up and down.
Your initial question was, had the congregation answer universal. One to be true, the other has to be true as well. Whether you accept me or not,
God accepts you into this one, the universal group.
if I'm accepted by God into that, then I'm accepted by God.
Well, again, are there local congregations that God doesn't accept?
If I'm not, then it's not God's congregation.
Yeah, there's a. You see that this is.
Well, okay. Let me see if I can maybe. I understand what Don's saying. I understand what you're saying. There is a sense in which that has to be true, but there is the sense in which, as in we just talked about with Paul, that the members did not accept him because they had incomplete information.
Right.
And when Barnabas gave them complete information, it was not that they were not a congregation of God's people. They just were a congregation that didn't have all the information they needed to make a decision.
Here-
Rejected
God
him.
has all the information.
Okay, but at first they rejected him until they were given that full information.
Okay, I'm gonna hit the brakes for a second.
That's really about where you have to stop with that.
Okay, yeah, and I'm going to move on from this, but one is not a part of a local church unless the members of said local group accept him. Paul is accepted by God. He was not accepted by those in the Jerusalem church until they accepted him. And did that change his salvation? Did that change his membership in the church that mattered, the one true church? No, it didn't. But he wasn't a member of that local group until the members accepted him. And that, I think, that's what the scriptures say on the matter. I don't know of a scripture that says otherwise in that. Keith?
He couldn't go away and worship. Salvation is the Lord's church. So
Okay.
if the church is founded what you're saying about Paul not being
Right.
And they didn't know, but they didn't trust.
All right.
They didn't environment
So let me ask you something. Had Paul been worshiping with Diana of the Ephesians, what changes on this chart here? His membership in this group, the Universal Church. Now, he could have been part of a local church and been worshiping Diana of the Ephesians on the side. There's kind of an interesting little twist to the whole thing. In fact, that's the thing that he sort of beats the Corinthians over the head over. In 1 Corinthians 10, he tells them to stop going to temples and worshiping the idols. Because, well, I mean, you can't be part of God and be partaker with the idols as well. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. And so, they've got people who are professing Christians in this local group going off to worship, Diana or the Ephesians and whatnot. Their membership in this group becomes threatened. This one over here, they can become a whole congregation of apostates. But this one over here is what becomes threatened here. This is the one that matters in terms of our salvation. In terms of our work of edifying other brethren and helping other Christians get to heaven, the local church is necessary. And there are going to be lessons coming up later in this class where we talk about the necessity and the function of a local church. But as far as our salvation is concerned, as far as our standing before God is concerned, this is the thing, this item over here is the thing that matters. Being part of the universal church is what makes you saved. Because by definition there are no unsaved people inside of it and there are no saved people outside of it. Now the local church, you got some saved people who are outside of it, as in the case of Paul in Acts 9. And you have some unsaved people that might have snuck in and become a part of it, like Diotrephes or others. It's the universal side of this that matters.
Well, everyone in the universal church.
That's what I say. Everyone in the universal church is saved. Everyone in the universal church is saved. That is the definition of the universal church.
Not what to say, probably.
Well, yeah.
No, I'm not saying that. No.
No, if you sin, you fall out.
That's true as well.
It's possible everyone.
I'm confused by your question. Ivana.
Maybe if you think about it.
That's true. That's true. I think I've even stated it backwards a couple times unintentionally in the course of this class. But no, the Lord adds you to the universal church on being saved. We got that. And so the congregation on the right is the result of putting all the saved people together. In the 5 minutes we have left, can I get through the rest of the material? No.
Let me say one thing. Don said, the problem with a can of worms is getting the lid back on.
Yeah.
The good thing about opening a can of worms, though, is you force people to have to think, step outside their comfort zone
That's
to
true.
examine things a little differently sometimes.
Don.
Your point about Paul not being accepted, that's they haven't, even though they have that's the great thing about knowledge. They are perfect. They know who
Right.
are not saved.
Now, as far as the universal church is concerned,
Church, I agree, those who are saved,
yes.
but also
Well, you're still saved because you're still part of this group over here.
we would come here and you guys would go,
Right. Now, it might say something, sometimes that says something about the local church. Sometimes it doesn't. The folks in Jerusalem were acting on what information they had. Sometimes a local church rejects people for bad reasons. Who is the judge of that? Well, who is the judge of whether or not their reasons are good?
God is.
That's God, right. And there is a sense, too, in which local churches will be held accountable. We could look at Revelation for that kind of idea. In the same way, that families are held accountable, governments are held accountable, everybody's held accountable on some level. But again, because the founder on that end is Jesus, and because you get men involved in the process on this side, one of these groups is going to be perfect in its understanding of who is the true Christian, and one of its groups is not going to be perfect in its understanding of who's the true Christian. That's why the distinction between those who are actually Christians, who are saved, and those who are professing Christians. That is why the distinction between the Lord adds and knowing those who are His versus the perception of men and what men choose to accept. And so accept is spelled with a P, not an R. Dennis.
There's another side.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is
Mm-hmm.
for the local congregation. And it's really more of a practical thing. It's not
Yeah.
where do you go to church?
Right. And so that's the thing. The local church is necessary because you can't get all the members of the universal church together. We're limited by time, we're limited by space, we're limited by human history, all of that. Now, in the example Dennis just cites, how did he become a member of this local congregation? Well, somebody actually wrote him a letter of recommendation, did they not? And they sent it to Ruth, and Ruth said, there's this fellow who needs to get to church here, and so, and that it's as simple as that. Somebody we know vouches for you, or we accept you either because we saw you baptized or because somebody else tells us about your baptism or tells us about your confession or whatnot, and we accept you. We to say, okay, yes, you are a professing Christian. You are thinking on the same plane that we are in terms of having a relationship with the Lord and devotion to God and devotion to what the Scriptures say and all that. Now, it is the local church. Another element that's involved in all this is the local church has a responsibility to discipline those who are not living consistently with their profession, not living consistently with that profession in Christ. For example, if somebody's out committing fornication, is that consistent with their profession in Christ? No, it's not. And what are you supposed to do? Well, you're supposed to actually put him out of the local congregation in that instance until he repents. That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. I had more to get into.
Only stop there and finish that point.
I don't want to erase my board.
We can recreate it.
Yeah, I guess we can. I've got this in my head. All right, well, it was a good discussion. I think we've learned a couple things here and there. Hopefully we'll get to the bottom of this at some point, right? Thank you for the discussion. And Kathleen has a comment. Yours will be the last one, and then we'll close. I'm sorry? Well, ultimately, yes, their life should be an example. I mean, again, you have the case of Paul and other things like that. It's helpful to have them vouched for, I think. A lot of there's a lot of people. None of you ever gave me a letter of recommendation that said that I should accept you. I just accepted you. That's the way it goes. I've been in some situations where, people will actually disrecommend somebody to me, and then I get to know them and find out, no, I disagree with that. And so sometimes that happens because the recommendations of men are wrong. And the ultimate evidence of whether someone is a Christian is, yes, it's in their life and the way they live, the way they choose to manifest the gospel in their existence. So, good. Till next time.